Okay. So first of all, I would like to wish a very good evening to my friends in the East and a very good morning to my friends in the West. And as all of you know, the topic for discussion today is how to make spirituality an interesting process. So before we begin answering this question, it would be good to just briefly discuss what do we mean by spirituality and what is it exactly that we are trying to make interesting. So spirituality by itself, does not have a very precise mathematical definition, but more or less a workable definition, as you can see on this slide, is that spirituality refers to a process of reformation of the personality. Now, when we say personality, we refer to a person, and a person essentially is made up of three, things. Of course, there are more, complicated versions of, such definitions. But for our purpose, the simplistic model actually works quite well. So, a person consists of a body and a mind and what we call life energy, which is also called soul sometimes. But I feel life energy is perhaps a more appropriate term for our discussion. And when we refer to body, we are basically referring to physical work that our hands, our legs, our various organs do. Mind, of course, is a lot more complicated thing. But again, for our discussion today, it is sufficient to call mind as a combination of logic and emotion. So basically, when we are talking of spirituality, we are talking of reformation of the personality, which basically means reformation of these three things. So when we talk of reformation of logic, we are referring to Gyan Yoga, or what is known as the path of knowledge. A great example of this path is our own person Vivekananda, or if you take more ancient times, we can refer to Shankaracharya. These two are the greatest one of the greatest Gyan yogis that the our planet has produced. Then we can talk of reformation of emotion, which is called Bhakti Yoga or the path of devotion. People like Tulsidas, Mirabai, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they all fall in this category. Then we have reformation of work, Karma Yoga, which is the path of service. Here again, Vivekananda perhaps is one of the greatest examples. Other examples could also be Krishna, Rama, or other such figures, personalities which figure in our scriptures. Then we can also talk of reformation of life energy, which is Raj Yoga or the path of meditation. But this path, Raj Yoga, is actually quite different from the remaining three yogas in the sense that this Raj Yoga has, very strict rules. And, there are also some, writings which say, and which I also tend to believe, is that Raj Yoga's practice is, not really meant, for people like us who lead, what is called a normal life in that sense. But Raj Yoga practice requires, very, very strict rules, which one has to, live in a certain kind of an environment for this practice to be actually fruitful. So for our discussion today, we are not really going to refer to Raj Yoga that much, but we will focus on Gyan Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Karma Yoga, and we'll see how can we make these processes interesting. And we'll also discuss what things make them boring and how can we counter those various things. So when we talk of what makes the spiritual process boring, there are of course many things which can come to our mind, but primarily one can think of these four aspects which tend to make spirituality of something that sounds a little boring. So one thing is this overemphasis on asceticism. This idea that in order to be spiritual, one has to give up all the pleasures of life. One has to go to a forest, or one has to become like a something like a a person who is not social. One has to become a recluse. Those kinds of ideas are sort of quite prevalent in certain circles. Then another idea which comes up is that for the spiritual process to be meaningful, it is overemphasized that we need to sit with closed eyes for long hours, and this process is termed meditation sometimes. But it's important to know that meditation is something quite different from just sitting with closed eyes, and it's a different thing. So this overemphasis on sitting with closed eyes also tends to make the spiritual process sound quite boring. The third point is overemphasis on surrender and obedience. It's always good to respect our elders, and it's good to have respect for people who are more knowledgeable. But too much stress on surrender and obedience actually tends to dampen our own spirits and tend to actually decrease our own mental capacities. So this overemphasis on surrender and obedience also tends to make the spiritual process somewhat boring. Then the fourth point is overemphasis on this holy company. Of course, satsang is very, very important. There is no doubt about that. But this kind of a judgment about who is holy and who is not holy is kind of not very good for the spiritual process. So what can we do to counter these 4 points? Firstly, what we need to do is that to understand that it is possible for a householder to be as detached as a monk. It is not that people who are ascetics and who live in jungles, they are definitely spiritual people. There's no doubt about that. But that doesn't imply that a householder who lives in a house, who has a family, kids, a spouse, who works in a company, or has his business, it is not necessary that a householder is any less detached than a monk. Whether a person chooses to be a householder or a monk is the personal choice that a person makes, but that doesn't say anything about that person's spiritual standing. A householder can sometimes be more spiritual than other people who are living away from the society. Then regarding the second point, it's important to note that meditation is enjoyable, very much enjoyable, but it requires immense preparation. One of the reasons why people who just begin the spiritual process, they find meditation to be boring, is because they have not gone through that preparation which is required to make meditation an enjoyable process. Nowadays, many spiritual organizations stress too much on meditation, but if you kind of read the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, you will understand that there are a lot of steps that one has to undergo. That there is yama, niyama, which one has to undergo and practice before one can actually do meditation in a meaningful way. So if we just sit with closed eyes for long hours without actually having gone through that preparation, we will certainly find spirituality to be a boring process. But for that, the thing to blame is not meditation, but lack of that correct preparation which is required to make this process enjoyable. Then regarding the third point, it is important to note that obedience is good, but only to a certain point. Beyond that, discussions are a very essential component of mental growth. If you say that I will only obey what my guru says and never question him, then okay, there is a possibility that you may still make spiritual progress, but that possibility is not actually large. And if you read the lives of most of our spiritual saints or gurus, you will find that most of their close devotees, most of their close disciples, the closest circle that they had very intense arguments with each other, with the guru, that they did not just accept blindly what the guru was saying. They actually had very intense discussions, very intense debates with the guru, and only after they were personally convinced did they actually accept what the guru was saying. And this sense of independence, this sense of personal judgment is very very important if we truly want to grow spiritually. So this is a balance that we need to strike. If we start to argue with everything and everybody, then also it becomes difficult to actually lead a meaningful life. But on the other hand, the other extreme is also problematic, that we just blindly accept or just surrender to some person whom we think is our guru. So that balance is very very important to strike, that we need to obey certain things which our elders and which our guru says, but there are certain things that we also need to argue and debate about before actually accepting properly. Then regarding the fourth point, as I mentioned, it is almost impossible to judge the holiness of a person. So of course, one has to of course be little judicious about the kind of people a person we spend time with, but we should not be too judgmental about whether that person is spiritual or not spiritual. Because many people who are outwardly spiritual, who have outward signs of being spiritual, their internal lives may actually be totally messed up. And it is also possible that the opposite is the case with certain people, that outwardly they appear to be very normal, sort of almost non-spiritual kind of people. But if we actually start having a conversation with them, or if we actually start spending time with them, we'll realize that they are some of the most spiritual people that we have ever come across in our lives. So here it is of course important to judge, and to kind of choose carefully the kind of people we spend time with. But we should not become over judgmental about people's holiness. There again has to be a balance that one has to strike. So what exactly then do we do? Okay, so these were points where which we can take to prevent spirituality from becoming a boring process. But what can we actively do to make spirituality an interesting process? So I would like to discuss 2 points in this regard. And the first point is that do not be obsessed with your own thoughts and show active interest in other people's views. This is a very very essential part of being interesting and being involved in an interesting process. That people who are interesting, they are not obsessed with their own thoughts, and they show active interest in what other people around them are thinking, both in their family as well as their jobs. So as we discussed, spirituality, can be thought of as, various paths. One is Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Karma Yoga. So let's see how we can apply this basic principle in any of these three paths that we follow. So in Jnana Yoga, what we need to do is that we need to actively seek the company of people who disagree with you and or have different views. Many times what happens is that, many people are very scholarly, very intellectual, and they have a very deep understanding of our scriptures. But a mistake that they do is that they tend to confine themselves to a very closed circle where, they end up just agreeing with each other. And, up to a certain point, this, process does sound interesting, and it is interesting. But after a certain point, it becomes quite mundane and boring, because, after a certain point, if you're talking only to people who agree with you, there is nothing really to discuss and debate about. you know so to make this path of knowledge, this path of Gyan Yoga, an interesting process for a very long time, we need to actively seek the company of people who disagree with us and who have different views. This is important not just to make the process interesting, but to actually keep learning as, we follow this path. Learning should not happen only up to a certain age or only up to a certain time. Learning is a lifelong process, and for this process to happen for a long long time, we have to seek the company of people who have views which are different from us. What about Bhakti Yoga? In Bhakti Yoga, what we need to do is that we should have devotion for one form of God, for that devotion to be really intense and meaningful. But we should not deride other forms. In India, we have this very funny, thing that, many followers of Vishnu, sometimes make very, insulting remarks about Shiva and his devotees. And the reverse also sometimes happens, that, that devotees of Shiva sometimes make, sort of insulting comments about Vishnu and his devotees. Now this is kind of, ridiculous in some sense, because, that I may have more devotion towards Vishnu, but, I have no right to, think that, Shiva is a lesser mortal or his devotees are, on the wrong path. So this is very very important, that we should have devotion for one form of God, for that devotion to be really intense. But we should understand that other forms are also forms of the same God, that they are not really different in a fundamental sense. And the second thing is that we should not just chant his name, but also enjoy his Leela. Now, by Leela, I just do not mean the mythological stories, but this world itself that we are living in. Stories which are there in our, which are present in our Mahabharata, Ramayana, Puranas, they are also a part of Leela, and they are, very interesting. But what we see around us, the life we lead around us, this family, this job, the friends that we have, and other things which go on in the world, is also a Leela of the God. So we should not just, seclude ourselves in a room and chant his name and think we'll get mukti. No, we should also enjoy this world around us, but in a meaningful process, in a way which actually enhances our spiritual growth instead of inhibiting it. Then then this path of Karma Yoga. This path of Karma Yoga is perhaps most relevant to, to all of us who live in a society, who have jobs, who have families. So in Karma Yoga, the most important thing is teamwork. Now this teamwork is kind of a, highly used and abused word nowadays, and, it has sort of, started becoming meaningless in that sense. But it is actually very very relevant in regarding this particular point, because, sometimes people think that teamwork means just, giving orders to a group of five people and they should obey your orders. No, teamwork is not about giving orders and making five people obey what you're saying. Teamwork is about behaving as a team. When we take our body for example, you know every human body or every living organism is actually a fantastic example of teamwork. Our body has so many organs. It has eyes, it has ears, it has lungs, it has liver, it has the heart. Now if all of these, organs started passing orders to others and expecting everybody else to do their job without themselves doing anything, this body would actually not function. So this body, various organs in this body are doing a teamwork in such a fantastic way that you do not feel that they are actually different from each other. When we think of ourselves as a person, we do not think of, separately of the liver or separately of the heart. We think of ourselves as one single individual, which is kind of a whole. So teamwork essentially means that, that people, or the members who are a part of the team, they should work in such a way that to a outsider it should appear as if it is just one single organism which is doing the work. That is the real meaning of teamwork. And that teamwork, that kind of teamwork, that meaningful teamwork is possible only if every individual or every member of the team pays a lot of interest in what the other member of the team is saying and trying to do and suggesting. That's a very, very crucial part. If we are just obsessed with our own thoughts, then that is not really teamwork. That is called dictatorship, basically. Okay, so if we really want to follow karma yoga in an interesting way, in a meaningful way, so here teamwork is the key. And if we follow this thing properly in our family, in our job, with our friends, then again the process becomes very, very interesting automatically. Then the second point which I would like to mention is that it is good to have our own opinions and not blindly follow others. This is kind of the reverse, or sort of complement of what we just discussed in the previous slide. So one extreme is to be obsessed with our own thoughts and not pay heed to what others are saying, and the other extreme is to not have our opinions at all and just depend on what others are trying to suggest to us. Both these extremes are actually quite boring and quite problematic. And what we need to do is to strike a good balance between the two. Okay, so in the previous thing what we saw is that we should not just be obsessed with our own thoughts but pay attention to what others are saying, and at the same time we should not just blindly follow what others are saying but also have our own opinions. So let's just see briefly how does it apply to these three parts that we are discussing over here. So in the case of Gyan Yoga, what we need to understand is that we should not try to memorize a particular scholar's interpretation of our scriptures. It is very important to, of course, read scriptures, read various interpretations. There is Shankaracharya, Aurobindo, Vivekananda, and many other people have written beautiful commentaries on our scriptures. So it is very important to read all of them, or at least some of them, but we should try to come up with our own version, which is very, very important. Now, when I mention our own version, I do not mean to say that that version should be totally different from what, say, Shankaracharya is saying. That is perhaps not possible, because when such great scholars have done so much work on these scriptures, it's quite likely that our we will agree with a lot of things which they are saying. But it's not necessary to agree with all of that. And wherever we disagree, it's okay, to accept that disagreement and to try to come up with our own version, but ensuring that our version is also logically consistent and not just a result of some emotional process. So what's important to know is that every person, including an enlightened soul, every person looks at the world with his or her own glass. So borrowing others people's glasses works only temporarily. So we can borrow others people's glasses for some time. By when we read commentary of a certain person, we are just borrowing other people's glasses. But that doesn't really work for us, because everybody has a different power of the eye. So for a few days you can use other people's glasses, but finally you need to go to the optician and get your own glass. So that's very, very important to know in this context of Jnana Yoga. In the context of Bhakti Yoga, what's important to remember is that your relationship with God may be through your guru initially, because initially not everybody may be able to pursue the spiritual path independently. And we need a guru, many of us need a guru, and that's okay. But as bhakti matures, our relationship should be direct. So we can be introduced to God through our guru, but after that introduction phase is over, we should be able to make a direct relationship with him without the need of anybody. And that is very, very important to make the path interesting. If you always keep depending on the guru, then after a certain point of time it sort of becomes very repetitive and very mundane. But if you try to make it direct from the very beginning in a slow and steady process, then we'll realize that after some time the relationship has become direct and very, very interesting and very, very refreshing. Then what about karma yoga, which is, again, as I mentioned, it is perhaps the most relevant path to most of us who are leading so-called a very, very normal life. So in Karma Yoga, the important point to remember is that good teams are built by good leaders who have a clear and unique vision. Okay, so this is very, very important. and a solution that work for someone else may not work for you. So here again, a team, or if you see, various, these IT companies that we have today, either in the US or say in India, in Bangalore, for example, you know so the most interesting companies, the companies are which are the most interesting, are the ones who have a very clear and unique vision of where they want to go, the kind of products they want to build, the kind of company culture which they want to build. Okay, so that is what differentiates them from a run of the mill kind of a company which is just trying to perhaps imitate some other success. So this is also what makes an organization or a person very, very interesting, that it is good to listen to others, it is good to take feedback from others, but finally you need to sit down and have your own views, which is quite unique and which is perfectly fit for your own personality, because nobody in the world knows you better than yourself. So you should take advice from others and their input, their suggestions, but finally your final decision, or your final understanding of yourself should be based on your own analysis. So you should have your own independent opinions, and that is very, very important in order to make this process interesting, because if you depend on others too much, then initially things may work out well, but after a point, things start becoming very, very difficult and very, very problematic. So to summarize, what we just discussed, I would like to share with you a quote by Dave Gahan. It says, "You have got to put interesting people around you. You have got to work with people who are gonna inspire you to take the songs you have written into a completely different direction. Because there's nothing more boring than going to the studio and predictably knowing what's going to happen." So, with this, I thank you all. If you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer. So, to ask a question, you can either raise your hand, or you can also type in the question bar below, and then I will read that and answer your question. So, please feel free to ask any question that comes to your mind. Okay, so we have a question by Miss Vijay Lakshmi. I'm going to unmute you. Yes, hello, can you hear me? Hello, is Miss Vijay Lakshmi there? Perhaps she's not.
I think Kushal ji, she is on telephone, so I'll just ring her up to write it.
Okay,
She's
okay.
attending for the first time.
Okay, sure, sure. Okay, okay. Thank you. Okay.
I'll just call her. Yeah. Tell her to write the question. Vijay Lakshmi ji, what is your question? Please tell me.
Okay, okay. So we have got a question. It says, "Can we not attain spirituality without a god?" Okay, so that's a very, very interesting question, and of course, that depends on sort of which philosophy one follows. There is no one answer to this question which will be acceptable to all. So in Hinduism, being an atheist is perfectly acceptable. And Especially in other, there are some other spiritual paths, for example Buddhism, where there is no concept of a god as such. So it is definitely possible to attain spirituality without a god. It's perfectly possible, but what is important in the spiritual path, as many saints have mentioned, is to carefully examine every single stand that we take. So if we believe that there is a god and we want to follow that path, it is perfectly okay, but we need to constantly analyze whether that belief is right or not. And the reverse is also true. So if we want to be an atheist and follow spirituality, it is perfectly okay. And and there are, as I mentioned, there are some very valid and established spiritual paths which exist, which take you towards spiritual states without a belief in god. But there again, it's very important to keep questioning our belief, that whether god exists or not. So what is important in the spiritual process is not so much whether we believe in god's existence or not, but this constant questioning of our beliefs. It is this constant questioning and constant analysis which actually makes us spiritual, and not necessarily a belief in existence or non-existence of a certain thing. Does that answer your question? So there's another comment by Mr. Mangesh. It says that that this reminded him of a verse 4.34 in the Gita, which says, understand the true nature of knowledge by approaching an enlightened guru. If you prostrate at their feet, serve them and question them with an open and guileless heart, those wise seers of truth will instruct you in that knowledge. This is a very, very interesting and relevant quote from the Gita, and I thank Mr. Mangesh for sharing this. So, as you see, the Gita itself says, that one should question with an open heart. And Gita, if you read Gita, you will find that Gita itself is a process of question and answer between Arjuna and Krishna, without Krishna putting a limit on what can be asked and what cannot be asked. Arjuna asks all kinds of questions which come to his mind, and Krishna answers them very, very patiently. So this culture of asking questions and having a very open discussion with a guru is a very inherent part of our Indian culture, and it's very, very important to practice it regularly for all of us. So thanks, Mr. Mangesh, for sharing this. Okay, Miss Julia has a question. So, Miss Julia, I'm going to unmute you. Yes, Miss Julia, can you hear me? Hello, Miss Julia, can you hear me? Miss Julia, if you have a question, and since it's not audible, if you could please type it in the question box below, then I could read out the question and then and share my views on that. Hello.
Now it's possible to listen?
Yes, yes, yes. Now it's possible to listen. Yes, thank you.
Okay, okay. My question is about the role of the guru, because understood without guru is not possible to contact to the God. But at the same time, afterwards, when maturity of devotion is coming, uh, then the guru no need the guru. I understood like this, because the contact is direct with God. And then I have a doubt, no, because always I was thinking guru is needy up to the end of the path, and And then please give me more information about this.
Thank you. So this is a very interesting and very important question. That so what Miss Julia is kind of asking is that that this idea of a guru, that there are some sort of scriptures or some texts which say that that to really progress on the spiritual path one needs a guru, and without a guru it is not possible to sort of make good spiritual progress. But there are other sort of texts which says that you may need guru initially, but later on you do not need a guru. So if we read the lives of enlightened souls or realized souls across various countries in the world, what we find is that that all kinds of possibilities exist. That there are some people who have been able to reach the highest realization without the need of any guru ever. But there are some other people who have depended on a guru till the very end. They started their process through a guru, and they were with the guru till they reached the spiritual realization. And there are other examples also where people met a guru, started the process, but after some time left the guru and then went on in their own direction. So what is again I would like to stress, and which has been sort of a central point of this discussion, is that a spiritual process fundamentally is about being able to take decisions which are good for our own well-being. That is the most fundamental part of the spiritual process. Realization, enlightenment, all these things come much later on, and we don't even know exactly what these states are. But fundamentally, what spirituality is about is being able to take independent decisions on our own. So again, we should take suggestions from others, we should take feedback from others, listen to them, learn from them. But finally, our life decisions should be our own. So whether we need a guru or not is something that we have to decide for ourselves, which no other scripture can tell us. So if a person feels that if he or she needs a guru, then yes, then that person should go out and seek a guru who has true knowledge and who can impart that knowledge. But if a person feels inherently that he or she does not need a guru, then that is also perfectly fine, because spirituality is not so much about following a particular set of things which will lead you somewhere. Spirituality is essentially about developing your own decision making skills. That's basically what it is. So if you feel you need a guru, please go ahead and get one. If you feel you do not need a guru, that is also perfectly okay. But what is most important is that that decision should be your decision and not just borrowed from somewhere. That is the most crucial part. Does that answer your question, Miss Julia?
Yes, thank you so much. Very
Okay.
clear.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So there is one comment from Miss Bangera again, that she says that God with a form sometimes leads to superstition. Is it right? Yes, it is true that a God with form sometimes leads to superstitions, but that is not a fault of the God or of the form. That's a limitation of the human mind itself. And frankly speaking, I can tell you that there are people who do not believe in God, who are atheists, but they also have superstitions of all kinds. So it is true that a God with form leads to superstitions, but a God without form or no God can also lead to superstitions. So superstition is a result of a weak mind, which is kind of afraid of various things, and it is trying to give meaning to their fear and trying to justify their fear. Okay, it has nothing to do with God with form or no God. So superstitions will always be there. If there are some scientists who are also superstitious despite being atheists. So we should not try to undermine spiritual ideas or bhakti, for example, because some of bhaktas are superstition. It's okay. As long as they are within reasonable limits, it's perfectly okay. It's not a problem at all. Does that answer your question, Miss Bangera? There is another very nice, comment by Mr. Mangesh. He says, the key word is maintaining a balance between total subservience without question and total arrogance where ego maintains supreme. As one Mahatma said, a guru is a GPS, God positioning system. One needs a map to go and reach a destination. That's very well said. That's a very, very nice comment. And perhaps it is from Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev, perhaps. Perhaps. Yeah, that's definitely a very nice statement. But again, as that mentioned, that there are some examples of people who do not really need a guru, because perhaps they have their own GPS in their own minds, which is good enough for them to reach the destination. So if a person feels he needs a mobile with a GPS, it's perfectly okay. But if a person thinks that he or she can find out the way without a mobile phone with a GPS, then that's also okay. It's all about what we think is good for us. So thanks once again for sharing the very nice comment. Are there any other questions? So shall we end the presentation, Vibhaji? There are, I guess, no more questions.
Kushalji, it was really, really very informative and very nice presentation. Thank you so much.
There is just one more question from Mr. Sriram.
Yeah.
Yeah, shall I take this last one?
Sure, sure. You can take up to 9:30. We have time. No
Okay.
problem.
So what Mr. Sriram asks is that, do you see this process as a lifelong activity? Yes, Mr. Sriram, definitely yes. I do see this process as a lifelong activity. And this is again a very, very deep point, because in this spiritual process we have this concept of enlightenment or moksha, and it is believed that after that stage is reached, nothing more is required and you have reached the end. But when we actually scrutinize the lives of our saints in a deeper and little detailed manner, we'll sort of find that their evolutionary process does not stop at the moment of realization. For example, if we see the case of Vivekananda, he experienced samadhi, when Ramakrishna was still alive. But his learning process and his personality continued to evolve even after Ramakrishna's demise. Even throughout those years of hard work and kind of building up of various spiritual organizations, his evolution still continued. So definitely, even if a person claims that that person has experienced samadhi or some very high spiritual states, it doesn't mean the end of progress. There are higher and higher states of experience which exist, and so one has to keep the effort going on. So enlightenment is, of course I'm not enlightened, so I don't really know what exactly that state is. But when I read the lives of people who are believed to be enlightened, it is quite clear to me that that their progress kept happening even after they experienced that state. So yes, this process is definitely like lifelong process as far as I understand. Does it answer your question, Mr. Sriram? There is another question by Ms. Bangera. She says, "Why can't we memorize some verses to attain spirituality?" So now, of course, you can memorize verses, of course, and it's nice to know verses. There's no doubt about that. It's also good to chant some verses once in a while from memory without having to look at the text. But that's not really, spirituality. At the best, one could call it scholarship. That okay, if a person can sort of recite mantras from the Gita, or can has various shlokas from the Vedas at their fingertips. That is as the scholarship. As far as I understand, as per my understanding, spirituality is essentially a process of being able to take our own decisions. It is fundamentally an independent decision making process, but which involves taking inputs from others. That essentially is what spirituality in a very sort of broad sense. And memorizing anything does not lead to a better decision making process in any way. So memory can help if it leads to understanding. So their memory can actually be very helpful, because if you have a good memory, there is a good chance that you will be able to understand things better. But memory by itself does not lead to understanding, and there are people who have very good memory but very low understanding. And there are also examples of people who have very good understanding but not a very high memory. So memory can definitely help, in various ways, but one has to augment it with many other things for it to actually become spirituality. So does that answer your question? So what Ms. Bangera says is that I feel these verses are auto suggestions which may reform us. Yes, that is true, but they have to be taken in that spirit. That we should be open to reform. The problem what happens is that if we just start memorizing these verses, that can lead us to a false sense of ego, that that okay, we have become so learned and we know so many things, which actually prevents the process of reform from happening. But if we memorize these verses in the right spirit, with the spirit that we are just progressing and we have a long way to go, then surely yes, they can definitely reform us, in a very very deep manner. So this all depends on how exactly we memorize these various things, and what are the things that we augment to this process of memory in order to make it spiritual in a deep sense, without just stopping at a shallow level of scholarship. That is what will make us spiritual, if we augment this memory process with other things which are essential. But memory by itself will not lead to anything, though it may be a great enabler in some way. There's another question from Mr. Sriram. It says, how do we keep the process focused and not keep jumping from one path to another without a sense of direction? That's a very, very, very interesting question, and not easy to answer, perhaps in few words. But again, what I feel is that what we call jumping from one path to another, way of finding the right balance between different paths. Because our sort of Indian philosophy can broadly be classified into these four paths, as we all know: Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and the path of meditation, Raj Yoga. So it is not possible for a person to follow any one of these to the exclusion of others. We have to sort of follow all of them to a more or less extent. So a particular person may predominantly be following Jnana Yoga, but he or she will also have some touch of bhakti and karma and meditation. And another person may have be predominantly a karma yogi, but that person will also have some touch of bhakti, jnana, or meditation. So, till we find that right balance between these parts, it is natural for us to slightly, jump between one and the other. And it may look little, problematic in the beginning, because, we may feel that we are following just one thing but not making progress, and, following the another thing, then after some time, then not making process. But if we, are sort of doing it with the right spirit, the right spirit to sort of find the correct balance, that works for us. If that spirit is right, then it is not so much of a problem. But if it becomes a problem, especially when we are looking for some quick fixes. Many people who actually jump from one path to the other, they do so because they are looking for realization in 2 hours or 2 days. and they do not find that, hence they are shifting. That is a problem, because realization does not come in 2 days. To some people like Vivekananda, maybe it did, but to most of us it's not going to happen that way. So what is important is that we should not look for low hanging fruits. We should not look for sudden grace of God which may descend in just 2 hours, but we should be open to, this is again related to the question that you asked just previously, that is spirituality a lifelong process? Yes. And if we are convinced that spirituality is a lifelong process, that it's not going to end in 2 days, then our process will be much more stable. And even if we jump from one path to the other, it will be with the aim of finding the right balance instead of finding instant gratification. So if you are doing it with the right spirit, then it's okay. It's not that much of a problem. And sticking with one path may actually be also be a problem in that sense, that it may not be the right balance for us, but we are sticking with one path because of other reasons like fear, or perhaps we have some anxieties, uncertainties. Because of that, perhaps we might be sticking to one path. So sticking to one path or jumping between paths by itself is neither a good thing nor a bad thing. All that depends, so it all depends on the spirit with which we are doing that particular action. So sticking to one path may be problematic or may be good. Jumping between paths may be problematic, may be good, depending on the spirit with which we are doing it. Does it answer your question, Mr. Sriram? Yes, yeah. So as Mr. Sriram says, ultimately it becomes our responsibility. Yes, that's very, very true. That finally, after all is said and done, ultimately it is our responsibility. Whether we have a guru, not have a guru, whether what to follow, it is basically our responsibility, our decision making. That is what is the most crucial aspect of spirituality. And if we can understand that aspect, then everything else is taken care of in some way or the other. Okay, so I would like to thank all the attendees for having spared their valuable time to attend this webinar, and we hope to see you again in the near future. Thank you once again. Thank you, Vibaji, for organizing this. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.